Well, as promised, here I am a couple of days after my previous video on EVs and need to get rid of EV mandates. And of course, this week I'd like to discuss something as President of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Some of the work we've been doing has been focused on the Liberal leadership. The Liberal leadership is pretty important to me. Why? Because I've been probably a card-carrying office worker and person who helped in campaigns going back to the tender age of 12 or 13 in 1974. For a guy named Hugh Faulkner up in Peterborough, later on for Paul Cosgrove in Scarborough. And I've been consistent in terms of my time in the Liberal Party, which happened to be over a span of 4 decades. And by the way, I love leadership conventions. I remember one that I was in 1990, and you might be more appreciative of what I could do back in those days when I supported this guy for the leadership, not only in 1990, but in 1984. But rather than going back in history, just to demonstrate why I think leadership campaigns are important, is that they can't be orchestrated in a way that has only one person who's going to wind up winning. And if that's to be Mark Carney, and that's of course where the Liberal genius tends to be at these days, then we need to spend a bit more time understanding Mark Carney. I believe Mark Carney is Justin Trudeau 2.0. Why? He is the man who worked behind the scenes, moving the levers and adjusting the buttons for Justin Trudeau on the net zero policies, the policies that have left a lot of Canadians in that position where they can no longer afford to make ends meet, and for which our major exports have been blocked or have been diverted or have been in some way challenged, making it a very arduous task for these industries, oil and gas, manufacturing, mining, to do a better job, subjected to significant amounts of control, not only by lawfare, by green organizations which have no, and foundations and charities which have no audits, but also some of the efforts by Mark Carney himself. Yeah, I know his bank governor of Canada buggered off to go to the UK to become the chancellor, not the chancellor, but rather the Bank of England governor. All those things are important, and they came at a time in which many people say, well, he's the one that helped us get out of the 2009 global meltdown. That is not true. That happened because people like David Dodge, his predecessor, and Paul Martin, as well as the Liberal cabinet, chose not to allow banks in Canada to invest in questionable, dodgy mortgages. And as a result, Canada escaped the harshness of that global economic meltdown. But I digress. The important part here to understand about Mr. Carney is that he is really the instrument behind the net zero movement. And not only was he a part of that, as ordained by the World Economic Forum and the United Nations, he also played an important part in something called GFANZ. After 2021, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero basically tell various banks around the world, investment companies, do not invest in oil and gas. Well, that's very deadly for a country like Canada, which our number one export is in fact oil and gas. It's our significant component of why 20, 30 billion bucks in revenues goes back to pay for our social programs that helps federal government, provincial government, and yes, even municipal governments. But it's important to understand that Mr. Carney, not only in that role, but also his role at Brookfield, spent a lot of time dumping on the idea of Canadian pipelines, trying to find ways, cute ways to block them at a time in which Canada could have come to the rescue of at least 12 of our greatest trading partners to say, hey, we can sell you more natural gas and oil and LNG and whatnot. We instead took the position, or he instead took the position, that we could somehow block the growth of that important sector, that vital sector, by ensuring that we build pipelines in Brazil, pipelines in the Middle East, but block pipelines here in Canada. Canada, a country with arguably the 3rd and 5th largest reserves of oil and natural gas. In fact, Alberta has more oil than all of the United States combined. The reality, I think, for many of us is that Mr. Carney doesn't represent a new way ahead for the Liberal Party. And that's not to take away from his ambition and the fact that he was a banker. They don't make great politicians, but hey, who am I to judge? I've only spent, 18 years as a Liberal member of Parliament, 40 years in the Liberal Party in the trenches, helping other Liberals get elected. It's a sense that the problem we have with Mr. Carney is his agenda is one that is completely out of step and has not worked, whether it's emissions caps, whether it's carbon taxes, whether it's a second carbon tax, a clean fuel standard, whether it's EV mandates, or whether it's just the idea of strangulating the energy sector, which could hurt Canada and continues to dog the country's economy. At the end of the day, his policy is really a recipe for continuing to hammer Canadians financially and raising the cost of living, because as we all know, not just the lack of divestment has meant the weakness in the Canadian dollar. And by the way, 144 pennies to buy $1 US, that's cost you an extra 27 cents a liter on the price of gasoline and diesel. Think about that next time you have to fill up your propane tanks or your natural gas flow next month, because the cost of everything in this country, not just energy, food, and everything we consume, is priced in US dollars. Now, I've been saying this for several years now as a result of my work for 30 years predicting gas prices. So I see it symbiotic. One goes with the other. Important that we understand that what Mr. Carney is proposing is more of the same. Canadians have had enough. We've had 10 years of this government and its policies. It's time not just for a change in leadership, which we now have with Justin Trudeau leaving, but having Mr. Carney, who is really a replica of Mr. Trudeau, perhaps a little smarter, what some would say, with less hair, perhaps no socks, no sobbing, no selfies. It is time for a colossal, immediate 180-degree change away from the policies that have been advocated by the Mark Carneys of this world. Mark Carney's policies will be bad for Canada, and as a result, our recommendation here is that Canadians continue to shy away from the very policies and instrument holders like Mr. Carney, whose interests are really to strangle the Canadian economy, to make it less effective than it is now. And for that reason, maybe the Liberal Party should spend a few more terms in opposition so it can rebuild itself and reconnect with what's important to Canadians, the bottom line, being able to make ends meet. Now listen, before I leave, a plug for Canadians for Affordable Energy. I've fused the gas price wizard, the gas prediction, with our site here. We've improved the site, and we can always use your help. Donations are more than welcome, as small or as large as you can make them, because we have a lot to offer. We were right on carbon taxes, we were right on net zero, and we're going to be right in the future direction of policies in this country. But we can't do it without your help. I want to continue fighting for you, even though there are some in this country who are fighting against you. That would be Mr. Mark Carney and his gang. Thanks again. Talk next week.